Back again. So all the work that's done so far in part 2, we've got panels cut and sized. They're being glued in this picture on the left. We've got 2 foot 6 inch legs on top, 3 foot 6 inch legs on the bottom, 3 foot 2 inch rails for the end and the head, and 6 foot 3 inch rails for the sides of the main bed. And then we got our stiles in a bunch down on the lower right. Now on the plans, everything with a red dot is complete, including the legs. All the legs are complete. And now we're going to get into doing a little bit of cove molding on the panels. And you can do this with a table saw. You don't need to have a cove molder if you don't even have a router table. If you've got a table saw or even a track saw, you can cut your 45-degree bevels. And actually, after I got this done, the large cove bit didn't look much different than a 45-degree cut when you're looking at it face on. So I'm going to use a shaper table, and in doing this it takes quite a few passes per side, and I'm really taking care not to get any tear out at the ends. So I'm doing this in a strategic order. But again, if you were to use a table saw and just do a 45-degree cut and then cut in just a little bit to give yourself the room for your tenon to go into the dado, you won't have any issues either. Now in this process, I've got to do both sides and all 4 ends. So you'll see this go through all 4 sides. I flip it, do the 4 sides again, then I raise the cove mold or the cove bit up and go through the process again until I get it to the thickness that I need. This is very time consuming. Like I said, I think table saw would go a whole lot faster. And if you have a track saw, something with a 45-degree option on it, you could cut that in a hurry. Now a lot of people actually make a tenon, and in this case I'm making the tenon and I'm fitting the tenon to the dado that I put in the end of the rails and the stiles. A lot of people will do that backwards to what I did. Couldn't tell you which way is the right way to do it, as long as it fits. Well, now we're getting into the tenon work and the rail work. Most of the stiles that I'm going to do here, I need to put a groove on both sides, both edges. So what I'm doing is running it through the table saw blade and reversing it, and I'm running it through again to get a width big enough to fit on the panels that I just made. Then I have to reverse it. I got to go on the other side and do another one, because you got a panel, then a stile, then a panel. So you have to have these on each edge. I left, because of the distance from the fence to the blade, I left just a paper sliver in between the 2 cuts, which required me to use a screwdriver to get that paper sliver out with a flat edge. There's a little fit up, everything looks good. As you can see, table saw at a 45-degree angle could pretty much do the same thing the cove bit did. And then we're going to run through this pretty quick. There's the paper sliver that I removed. I do that many times in this little stretch. You might even hear some music in the background. I'm getting very creative, still learning. Now I got a test piece of wood that I'm using there to get the, those are the rails for the foot of the bed. They only get a groove on one side, one edge. There's the head of the bed. Now we do the 6-footers. These are the ones on the side of the bed, top and bottom. And they will hold all the stiles and panels. And now I'm going to do a real test run right here with a 3/8 tenon that's going to fit into the rails. And I decided to go with a 3/8. There's a lot of people out there that would go with longer than that. These are actually holding very nice. Now I glued these stiles, and I only put a drop of glue on the panels when I had them in place. A drop of glue in the center of the panel. And these are set so that they can expand and contract, but I don't see that happening because everything's sealed quite nicely when I finally finish this project. It may still do it a little bit, but very minute. And here's the dry fit. And again, you look at that cove and you easily could do this with a table saw or a track saw to get that edge on the panel that's sitting in the middle. Now at the ends you'll see portions sticking out. That's all going to become a tenon that will slide into the leg. And that's coming up after we do a little testing with some stain. My wife and daughter wanted to go with a stain and then wipe it off, making it look like an older weathered piece of wood from the coast. I prefer a real wood look personally, but it turned out good and they're happy with it. Now in doing these, I had some glue out on the edges of the rails and stiles, and I turned my DeWalt planer down to 0 so it doesn't take anything off, and I ran that over the top of the glue which was on top of the wood, and it took it right off, flush with the wood. No sanding, nothing, it just perfect. And here's the gray that they like. A little sample piece. Put on some wood prep to help the stain take a little better. Didn't really make a whole lot of difference. Now what I'm doing here is I'm getting ready to cut some tenons on the ends of the panels, and those tenons will slide into the legs in the slot. And in order to do this quickly, I'm going to go ahead and take the table saw blade out and put a dado stack in. So if you've never put a dado stack in, or you don't know if your table saw can do this, take a look at the video that's coming up here in just a second. Now look how long the arbor is, and that'll indicate whether or not you can get a dado stack on there. Now some of the arbors are not long enough to take an entire dado stack, but you always need to leave enough room to safely get the nut back on and tight. Otherwise you can have a lot of dado blades spinning around and killing people in your shop. Hopefully not. That doesn't happen. Now when putting these dado stacks in, you've got a regular blade that you see is installed now. Then you get your chipper blades, and they get to be set in an offset so that the chipper blade, see where the chipper is, it doesn't interfere with the cutting blades and other chipper blades, so everything is kind of offset. And if your table saw accepts this, great, speeds things up. And this is your insert for the chippers for your dado stack. Now if you pay attention here, I'm cinching this screw down and the back end of the insert pops up, and I didn't notice it until after I made my first cut. And there, makes a nice clean cut. It's quick. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to establish a 3/4 inch tenon, because I have a 3/4 inch mortise machine. Well, I have a 3/4 inch blade on my mortise machine, and if I get this at 3/4 inch, it'll slide right in the 3/4 inch, and it'll have I'm going to have a shoulder right here as soon as I'm done cutting these. And you'll see how it fits all together here in a little bit. In the future, I don't think that I would have used a mortise machine to make these slots in my legs. The mortise machine did a bit of tear out on the inside of the leg. A router would have done a much better, cleaner job with a chisel at each end. But also in the future, I think that I would have gone ahead and made solid legs instead of hollow legs. I prefer the strength of solid legs, but so far I haven't had any issues with it. Now see, I set my planer down to 0, and I run across any glue that was on the surface, and it took it right off flush. Beautiful. Left very little sanding. So now we're getting into the mortising, and as I said earlier, it would have probably been a whole lot better if I had used a router with a 3/4 inch bit and a guide. This, because the legs are hollow, I had a bit of tear out as I was pushing through, but overall it worked. I know that I would have done it different otherwise. But I also know that a solid leg would be a whole lot better. Legs that I've built in the past, I always pancake them together and glue them, and I don't know why I went with a hollow leg on this one. It takes almost as much wood. So now that explains, I did a 3/4 inch tenon on the ends of the panels that are gluing right now, and this is a 3/4 inch mortising bit, and this goes pretty quick. Now I left a shoulder, obviously, because I used the dado stack. I left a shoulder on each end, so it slides, the long tenon slides into this mortise and leaves about a 2-inch shoulder above and below. And you'll see that fit up here in a little bit. There it is. They slide right in, flush with the top, and I still prefer the wood look over stain. Now, doing what I did with the handheld planer, DeWalt handheld planer setting at 0, left me very little sanding to do, but I did take this up a bit. I took it to, I believe, 220 grit. And if you look at the end, you probably see the tenon that will slide into the leg. And basically the only thing that I'm sanding off here, other than to do a final sand, is there is some sniping after running it through the planer. Sniping is when your planer grabs a little more at the end of the cut, and it doesn't take much to sand off. But the process of doing the stain was put a coat on, let it dry for 15 minutes, wipe it off. You can do a couple of coats, let it dry for 4 hours, come back and do another coat, and the more you do like this, the darker the gray will become. And this was the initial first coat. It looks alright, but that is after the third coat, and it's starting to look like a weathered older bed. And this is just a dry fit. I've got some metal pieces inside I welded up to hold the plywood that the mattress sits on. And I didn't need to do the uprights, but every little bit counts for me. I'm kind of really wanting it to be very, very sturdy. No squeaking. So there you see, wife is putting a lot of screws inside. I just didn't want it to move at all. I can't stand a squeaky bed, and I'm sure my daughter can't either. So the process of putting this together, I was thinking out loud, saying I didn't want to make it solid, gluing the sides to the legs or anything like that. So I'm using this style of threading. I like this. You get these, bolt this straight into place, hold the tenons in without gluing them in. Then I did pocket hole screws in addition, because like I said, I want it to be solid as a rock. So I did 2 pocket hole screws above the angle iron that holds the plywood in which the mattress lays on. I did 2 on the top on each end. It really helps stabilize it even more so. The legs at the head and the footboard, I guess you would call it, the foot panel and the head panel, I did glue those into place. I wanted to make sure that nothing rocked side to side. So I glued the large tenon into the mortise that I made. And those come out very easy, though. I found out I didn't even need to take any part of the bed apart. I could take the whole thing into her current room right now. It was no problem. Obviously, the lower legs and the desk, that's another story, but that's all assembled quickly in the room. So these are the post caps and post feet. So I beveled the tops, measured the inside, and screwed a smaller block to the bigger block. Slides right down in there. I left the single screw in place so that I could adjust them until I get it to where I want, and then I hit it with one little pin nail and it locks it right into place. When I got it, each one on there in the way I wanted it, I went ahead and marked it. You can see underneath my finger which post top goes to which one. I've labeled all of them. And no, you don't need to use a jointer to put the edges on like I'm doing now. Table saw works. Anything that you keep your fingers away from the blade is not a bad choice. And now we're getting into the desk. I'm making clean cuts on this plywood, and this is pre-finished plywood. A little more expensive, but it was really nice plywood. There's no voids in a plywood like you would see getting from some of the big stores. And I get some very, very clean cuts. And all my table saw is a little too small for cutting big full sheets of plywood. And I right now haven't got a outfeed table set up. That's coming. So that was a nice clean cut. Now I also used the track saw to cut up to the lines, and then used the jigsaw to cut through the lines. And I like this little woodpecker's jig for doing the router edges. It does a real nice job, and you got all the options up to 2-inch. Nice, very uniform. You try to pull a big piece of plywood up to a big belt and sander, it's kind of hard to manipulate, and this makes it very easy. Very easy to get a consistent, professional looking round corner. A lot of people will take a belt sander or something and make a mark with a quarter. This to me is just, it's quick, easy, and you get the same thing every time. Perfect. Now I'm just cleaning up the cuts here. This is going to be the desk. As I showed in the previous, I had made some cuts, so I got these out of order. But here's where I'm making the insert to where her chair will slide into the desk. And I'll come up real close, but not all the way into the line, and I finish it up with the jigsaw. Now, in your own way of doing things, you can design your desk in different ways, make it wider, narrower. I wanted to give her edges on her sides, left and right, that she can put some of her stuffed animals and whatever she wanted to put on there. But try to do your own design. This is really nothing more than to give other people ideas. I couldn't believe the cost of a desk online, the bed combo online. The one that we were looking at was $1,400. And after all was said and done, I think I spent just under $600 for wood, and it was a joy to build, so a lot of fun. And I really think that I got what I wanted out of this. Now, as I'm cleaning up the plywood, and I keep really looking at the edge of the plywood, there's no voids. It just looks good. My wife and I decided we'll just go ahead and use the stain on the edge of the plywood rather than putting the banding, the heat banding on the edges. So we couldn't find any banding that actually fit the color anyway. And now this is the upper shelf. The upper shelf is sandwiched between the lower legs and the upper legs, and it's got a block on the bottom and the top. And now I've cut out for the legs to come up through the desk, and that shelf will sit right on the top of the lower legs, as the next picture will show you. So this is easy. Your design. Cut what you want. I did about 1 foot all the way around to make a shelf, and here I'm using a piece of aluminum to raise my gussets up, because that's what the desk is going to sit on. Raise it up away from the rounded corner, and there's the gussets holding the desk up with no screws in it yet. And there's the top shelf in place with the little blocks on both sides that are holding it. Then the bed sits on top of that and is locked into place with the blocks that are on top. There's your gussets. I did some strengtheners that run along the back, sides, and underneath that hold the desk straight and stiff. And there you go. So the desk was the fast part. That was a one-day jobby. The other stuff took me a while. I had to sit down and just think about it. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll get another video out soon.